Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cheat Codes. I'm your host, TaSh, as usual, and today we are diving into something that I am sure you are sick of me being on my soapbox about, and that is building a strong and vibrant community, which is key for any game. So, I'm so passionate about it, and I'm really honored that one of our guests today is one of the leading voices in the space. I want you to welcome Victoria Tran to the show. And for those who may not know your incredible work, Victoria, will you please share a bit about who you are and what you do?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I do actually want to hear this soapbox later on, but I'll start with the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Tran. I'm the communications director at Inner Sloth. We make the game Among Us, and I also help run our indie game fund, Outer Sloth. And I do a bunch of different things in the games industry space. I'm one of the advisors for GDC, or Game Developers Conference, for like their business marketing side. I help organize Wholesome Games, and I wrote a book about community management called Mastering Community Management, which you can get now. Yeah,
Yes.
advertising.
So definitely congratulations on your new book. For those of you who are tuning in, WIGI has a book club right now, and this is our first book club, and this is a book of choice that everyone in our space has been really loud about. So I would love to know what inspired you to write it and what do you hope readers take away from it?
Yeah, so I mean, okay, so for a little bit of context of the book and like why I started it, I'm basically self-taught when it comes to like marketing and community management. Originally I was supposed to do healthcare things, which obviously I am not currently doing. But I really like wanted to learn about community management and games and all that. And the whole reason I started like writing a lot of resources online is because I couldn't find anything like that. And then as time has gone on, there have been so many wonderful resources out there. But I think that for me, the book was one, a really nice way to get deeper into a topic. Like, you can only get so far by reading like one online article or like two online articles, but a book lets you go like so much more in depth. And second, I think it's just a really nice way to structure a lesson. There's so many resources out there. It's like, where do you start? Like, if you're a beginner, if you're in the midst of production, like what activities should you be doing? What should you be thinking about? So I was hoping that when I made this book, that I could create something like that. So it's a little bit more structured, a little bit easier to follow along. Plus, has activities, so it's like you can apply it yourself and not just like passively read.
I think I like that you mentioned you don't have to just passively read it, because something that you emphasize in this book is really creating a kinder community with more productive online conversations. So what does kindness by design look like in practice when you're building a community for games specifically?
One of the important aspects that I try to harp on in the book is that kindness is not just like a noun. You don't just have a kind, or like an adjective. You don't just have a kind community. It's like a verb. You have to actively keep practicing at it in order for that to be true. So when I talk about kinder communities in my book, I think we're really used to talking about the internet like we have absolutely no control over it. And sure, it's the Wild West out there. We don't really have that much, but in the spaces that we are able to influence, whether that's the games that we play, the games that we're a part of, the forums that we make, the discords that we make around it, how can we actually influence those spaces? How can we kind of create a more, as I say, productive, space for players so that they get what they want, the developers are also able to have the information that they need, and everyone is working together rather than like facing a lot of friction points that don't need to exist when you don't have something like a kind space, or a space that thinks about the sustainability of the players and the developers in long-term sense.
That makes sense. Kindness is an action word. It's not necessarily something that falls on you from the sky, and it is important for us to kind of um, not only guide it but model it in our community
Mhm.
spaces. I love that. So you've also discussed how community management is really changing marketing. So can you elaborate how building a strong community is an efficient and effective marketing tool?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we are. we all know it at this rate. There is no escaping marketing. There's like advertisements everywhere, no matter what you do at this rate. Like you touch some grass and suddenly an ad pops up when you need like
Yes.
something happens. And as people kind of evolve and get used to that, one of the things I feel like doesn't ever really change is just that need and want for connection. Like, we're a pretty social species. And the beauty of community is that it's not just focused on like, how do we convert these players into super
Right.
fans that give us the ROI on whatever advertisement dollars we spent on them? Instead, community is more focused again on like, okay, how do we actually make things more useful for people and like uh, ensure that they can better understand what we're trying to provide or like what the game is trying to do or the stories that we share with each other, like how do we facilitate that? And I think just having that sort of genuine authentic connection makes any sort of marketing efforts, and marketing isn't like the devil word or anything, but it's
Yeah.
mostly just trying not to think of people just as numbers and more again as like connections to be made, as people who have like very deep seated interests and wanting to better communicate with them. And so again, as marketing kind of evolves and changes and like we're blasted by it, like how do we do things differently, how do we make sure that we're not just caught up in this trend and are trying to do something that is helpful.
It's almost like having these online spaces is definitely a cheat code for whatever you're producing because you're having real life and real time feedback from the people who are most invested in what you're creating.
For sure. Great working of the podcast title in there. I like that. I like
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. That's what I do. That's what I do. So something that I experience as a community manager is we're often on the front lines and we're the bridge between the developers and the players. So from your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions about what a community manager does?
Gosh. So like in the first few pages of my book, I think in the introduction, spoiler alert, there's a bingo card of all the different roles that a community manager has played in like an indie studio in particular. And that's because community, especially when you're in a smaller team, can touch on a lot of things, right? Like we're
Yes.
not technically just marketing. We're like a subset of it, but also we don't technically do paid ads, but sometimes we have to learn. There's
Yep.
PR, influencer management, customer service, crisis PR. Sometimes things like QA that people get
Mm-hmm.
us into, or production. Like it all just blows up and goes everywhere. So I
You're
think the
preaching to the
biggest
choir right now.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the biggest misconception is just that it's hard. Okay, it's a weird space of like a misconception that community isn't that important because all you really need to do is make the haha funny memes. And then also the misconception of, oh, but you need to do a lot of things. You need to be several different jobs at once in order to be a successful community manager, when that's not really the case. And it can be very difficult to communicate that, especially when, again, you are in a studio who maybe has never dealt with a community manager before and they don't know what's going on. It's similar to if you threw me into a programming team, I would have no idea what's going on.
That is true. I feel like a lot of, especially indie developers, bring on what they have labeled as community manager, but when you join, oh, I'm the marketing team.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I think honestly, like some community managers don't even know, right? Like if you have only worked in community and indie teams, you start getting a strange misconception of like, should I be doing more or
Right.
less? More?
What do you think we could do, or to better support community managers?
I think like any sort of work, and obviously this is not to say everyone needs to become a community manager to better know how to support a community manager. Like we know how to support a programming team without knowing how to program necessarily, right? To the best of our abilities. But I think just having the baseline understanding of what the job entails by either reading a book, wink, wink, or
I know a book. I think I
I
know one.
know Or like, yeah, just getting that like having like a good discussion with your community manager of like, hey, like what are the things that you're setting out to do here? Getting an understanding of expectations between like the manager and the community manager can be very helpful. And just being open to the fact that everyone in an indie team is doing, a lot of different, wearing a lot of different hats, doing a lot of different jobs, and there's going to be different strengths and weaknesses based on how much you ask someone to do. And if, as long as you're aware of like, hey, if you ask me to do like 10 different things, like five of them have to kind of be kind of bad if you want me to actually support all 10 things.
Something that I've struggled with explaining on teams, you touched on in your book, and you talked about doing things that don't scale. And that is very hard to explain to a team that is development minded. So can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so doing things that don't scale is basically the idea that, especially when you work in community, some of the best things that you can do for your players is basically having very personalized responses, being very aware, like knowing who the regulars are, or like if someone is mad, just taking the time to actually write out a full explanation and understand what they're doing. And like if you're trying to do, a mass amount of responses, you're not copying and pasting something. You're like taking the time to deep dive. And that's something that you can't really do at scale because you are one person who needs to fully understand the context of a situation in order to reply. But those things kind of have like their own cascading effect of like, oh, like this person sees, and everyone possibly in the community sees like how you've responded to this person, how much you care, how much you took the time. And I'm sure anyone can relate to this in real life. It's like if you're talking to a customer support person and they're like actually tackling your question instead of giving you like a prefabulated response,
Yes.
right? Of like, thank you for contacting us. Please fill out this form. You're like, I already filled out that form. I told you like five times. Please just let me talk to your manager. Like you can see like the amount of frustration and the amount of goodwill you have towards this company potentially changes depending on how personalized you feel or how much you feel understood by the person on the other end of the call or the internet, whatever. So yeah, so all that to say, doing it's harder to do things at scale and to explain that because it is such a time sink and because in terms of money and time it is not maybe the most quote unquote how do I put it, return on investment,
Right.
depending on how you want to put it. But it is definitely worth it.
I agree 100%. And something that you brought up that I did not consider in these terms is that in development, um, people always talk about FATUI. And for those of you who don't know, that's first time user experience. There is a FATUI when it comes to bringing people into the community. And you touched on that a little bit. So how did that come up? How what made you think about having a first time user experience for community members?
I mean, so much of this is also like just from personal experience, right? You join a community and you're like, how do I access the thing that I'm
Right.
trying to look for? And also just again, because there are so many studios now, so many online spaces, there are so many different ways to onboard someone into a community space. And the level of difficulty you face towards that, and maybe you want some friction depending on how gated you want your community to be. Um, Thinking about that first time onboarding experience is something you want as part of your game. Again, it's like if you are working on a multiplayer game, for example, like you want to think like, I want the easiest onboarding experience possible because I need as many people playing my game as possible. Versus a game maybe that is like a little bit more touchy or something that is a little bit more like culturally sensitive, you might want to have a little bit of more friction. And just being able to think about that and um, kind of ease the pain of onboarding multiple people at a time. Being able to think of that beforehand can be really important.
That makes sense. I get that. Um, but it is another element to bring in when you're creating a plan as a community manager to think about how you are welcoming the people into the community in a way that best fits the product you're representing. So I love that. So, considering your work on social media strategies, how can developers use platforms like Twitter or TikTok? Or I dead name Twitter. You know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
It's okay for that one.
Whatever.
But how can developers be transparent about their game? Because I feel like there is a benefit to being open to what you're creating. So how do you kind of toe that line as a company or a developer with being open?
Like being too open versus
Yes,
not having
versus
content at
not.
all.
Hmm.
Okay.
and not
Yeah.
and not just completely just because usually they say, well, we'll just do a devlog, and you're like, okay, you can't. Everything is not a devlog. You can't.
Yes. The magic answer is not just devlogs, shockingly.
Yes.
I will say though, and you probably saw this if you've read my book, in my book, it's like when I was writing the book, Twitter changed its name to X. And like I was halfway through the book, I was like, do I is it gonna change back? Do I do something with this? And then TikTok shut down for like 24 hours. I was like, I hate
Huh?
this book.
It was a lot happening. It was.
A lot was happening. I couldn't keep up while I was writing it. The social media needs to calm down. But back to the question on hand. Yeah, so when it comes to actually like being transparent online, obviously it depends on the studio itself, but one of the benefits, and I'm talking about indies a lot because that's my main experience, like one of the benefits about being indie is that you do actually get to be much more transparent than maybe like a triple A company gets to be. You have way less red tape. You can share a little bit more of the wonky things that go on, the bugs that go on. People love that. Um,
Yes.
but when it comes to thinking of like content, obviously, like you want to save some, you still want to be transparent, but like, you got to keep those sustained marketing beats for maybe years on end. In those respects, I would say like transparency doesn't need to just be about like, hey, this is what we're working on. This is all the stuff that we got done. And it definitely still can be, of course. But it can also just be things about like talking about the development process in particular. Like if you've run into a difficult thing and maybe you thought you could get through this one feature in 6 months and now you're like, well, now it's 8 months. And here's like all the things we're currently struggling with or working with. Obviously, all of this comes with a lot of context, and which is why you need the community manager to know the judgment. But you can also share fun things that happen. You can share things that are related to the themes of your game. You can talk about different aspects of game development. It all, again, depends on the kind of game that you're making. So, as a more concrete example, when I was making TikToks for Venba, obviously because it's a narrative single player game, there's a lot to spoil depending on whatever it is that you're talking about in the game. So instead of doing that, I would literally just talk about like all the South Indian dishes that were featured from the trailer in the game and like talk about the food, talk about the maybe some fun facts about it, like what it actually is for people who don't know, some of the music and some of the inspiration behind that, the sound effects and how we made cooking sound effects. Like there's a lot of things you can actually deep dive into that doesn't necessarily involve like a full on like devlog.
Right. I I agree. And now for my soapbox.
Go on.
So I feel that a lot of times in indie games, when it comes to resource allocation, community manager is a last thing considered. And then when it's considered, it's such a tight deadline that the expectations aren't often realistic. For instance, you're brought on in August, and they're like, the game launches in October, and you go, wait, and I'm running a beta test and a pre-alpha and a pre-alpha. It's so. What advice do you give to a community manager that's kind of thrown into that mix? Or conversely, what would you tell a indie company who maybe has is not necessarily thinking about a community manager until the last moment?
Gosh, yeah, that's so real. So when it comes to the community manager side, and I talk about this pretty extensively in the book itself, but basically, again, so much of what is going to happen in your work is being able to, one, set expectations with the team, and two, know how to communicate that to the team, right? So if you're, for example, I talk about like if you're talking to a programmer, sometimes they're just more numbers minded, and you do have to like think, okay, how do I actually like frame this in a way that makes sense, or like makes sense in terms of like the severity of the situation, right? Um, so when it comes to setting expectations, it's like one, asking questions. It's like, hey, what do you, if you are saying that the game launches in October and you hired me in August, what are you expecting out of this? Like, what activities do you think are reasonable? Like, even just like going in with full curiosity and like no judgment, like no being like, that's stupid. How could you think that I could do that in
Right.
like 2 or 3 months, right? But fully going in, like, no, like just listening to what they think is possible and then taking that and being able to like break it down and being like, okay, so from what I hear, like this activity is the most important thing to you and would be really cool for the team. So I can focus on this if you're okay, and it will look like this. If you're okay with every like these 5 other things that you talked about, maybe not happening at all. Like I like doing it in order of priorities. Like that tends to help them like understand. Oh, okay, like this is what I'm giving up for this, and then you can have a full discussion about it. And it's all again about like that curiosity and treating each other with respect. And hopefully they are also treating you with respect, which is another question, yeah, how can we talk to other people about, or if you're not a community manager and you're thinking of hiring someone and you're like, oh man, like I should have thought about this earlier and I knew I should have, but now it's happening. Sorry. I'm hiring in August and something's happening in October. That is okay too. Look, it happens to all of us.
Yes.
Um, Again, I would say one is to know what you actually want from your community manager. Again, I think because it tends to be a catch all and some people don't really know what to look for in a community manager, you should know like what you want them to take over. So if you're like, I really hate TikTok, let's just focus on TikTok for now and seeing the results from there, right? And not overloading it with expectations. Obviously, they can still help with other things. It's not like you're only hiring a TikTok manager. But it's being like, these are the top 3 activities that I really need taken off my plate. And then we can like just once I see how this community manager works, and if I like their work, because it goes both ways, then we can see if we can continue and work on other things. But it is a very long answer for a
No,
very
that
difficult
is,
question.
that one needed to be long. That is a difficult question. I also feel like in the space, I worry about expect unrealistic expectations placed on community managers to build a community based on vibes because
Mm.
that's such a weird space to be in as a community manager because you're thinking, well, what can I give to the community? What's available for the community? And their answer is build one. So what do you do as a community manager when you're what leverage do you have, or what tools can you use when you're in that limbo?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of it's one of those things where it's difficult, but it also makes sense, right? Like you're being hired to be the expert in this situation. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand what it means to build a community. There's just like, I don't know, hopefully people come to us. And that's okay. You're going to figure that out. And the ways that you figure that out, obviously, again, depend on the game itself. And it depends on any existing leverage that you might have, right? Like, are you joining a team that already has some games out? In which case, great, you already have a built in community. You can start working from there. But if you're coming from like scratch, they don't have anyone, then it is one like research into the game itself. Like, where are other doing a competitor analysis can be really great for this. So looking at other games in the same genre, kind of in the same theme, in the same mood, like what are they doing? Where are they going? What press are they contacting? What social media platforms are they finding success on? Seeing like what happens there and experimenting. I think one of the best things about starting from scratch is that if you screw up, no one's going to see you. Like
That's
that's
true.
it's
No one saw
amazing.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. Like that's I think when people talk about like how I learned what I do, it's like, well, that's because you just didn't see me when I was starting out and like
True.
flopping. Like so many L's were taken. But no one got to see it because no
Right,
one was paying attention.
those are private L's at this point.
Exactly. No, right? So I would take advantage of that situation and be like, you know what? Like, test maybe some of the things that make you like cringe a little bit. Like, maybe it's not actually cringy. It's just, you're not used to it. Um, Testing out the TikTok platform, testing out Instagram, testing out YouTube Shorts, testing out devlogs, testing out whatever it is. After seeing, like, making some informed decisions based on where you should put your time, judging from there, and then building that up slowly and slowly. And again, there's no like silver bullet answer for this. It's just a process of time.
That is a lot less stressful. The way you explained it, I wish I could go back in time and just play that for me from other experiences.
The amount of times, like, when I was like starting out in community and I did something and I would like legitimately kind of tear up because I was like, that was so dumb. Why did I think that would work?
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that, I mean, that's the nature of the game, and that's also the security that you have when you're with indie companies that are starting out, is that you get to be the guiding force, and the community is not going to form itself, so you get to have more say in the kind of community that you want to create. So it can be kind, it can be an informative space, it can be all those things, and you have you're the cook, you're the one that's mixing the pot at this point.
Exactly.
Oh, I love that. So thank you so much thank you for sharing your insight and your wisdom. I can't wait for the rest of the crew to dive into the book. They just started. I read ahead because I was excited about today.
I appreciate that. Hopefully you've been enjoying it. That's like,
Absolutely.
okay, that's good. That's like one of the things I will say. As a community manager, I'm like used to promoting other people's stuff. It's great. Chill. Could do it any day. Promoting my own thing, I'm like, oh, cringe. Everything
Yeah.
hurts.
That is when people they're asking me how come I'm not building my own platforms. I'm going because I'm building everyone else's, and when it comes time to create for myself, I think, oh,
I know, I feel you. But you should. You should,
you're
Tash. It'd be
right.
cool.
You're right. I'm on it.
Hmm.
I'm on it.
Yeah.
No, but I really appreciate you taking the time. So, where can our listeners find you and your new book?
Yeah, you can find me on various social media platforms. I did not do the smart thing and create a consistent handle because I was like, screw it. I don't care. But you can find me on Blue Sky, Victoria Tran, bluesky.social, I believe is the handle. I'm also on LinkedIn, Victoria Tran, or my website, victoriatran.com, which is also where you can find my book, victoriatran.com/book. It'll just give you links to like Amazon, Bookshop, anywhere you want to buy the book. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into Cheat Codes. I'm your host, TaSh. We can connect on LinkedIn. And to stay in the know of Women in Games International, please visit us at getwiggy.com and subscribe to our newsletter. And you can find us on every social media platform at GetWiggy. Take care, and we will chat soon.